In this video, we are going to see how to create the array class methods using a SQL that will be executed from this method instead of manipulating the array of objects like we did in the previous section. So I'll write the same three methods for these functions, and instead of same four methods, for example, and instead of do manipulating the array of objects that were loaded, I will write the SQL query that will be executed straight into the from the Microsoft database to get the result. So first one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the methods exactly in the same register array class, and I'm going to rename them with a different name. So instead of get all, which was previously looping through the array of objects, getting a student's ID. And for that student's ID, I was listing, going through the array of registers and finding the matching registration details and attaching it to the same result string. So instead of doing this, I'm going to run a SQL query of this format, which will be to select everything from students and registration, where student ID and registration ID using the linking key. So this is the query I will execute from our Java class and get the data that is necessary. So the way it will look is have the same method, but I've edited its name to get all using SQL. And I've created variables to store the data that will be retrieved. And using the result set rs object, I run the SQL query, the DB connection object. I will run the SQL select query, and the select query that I'm going to run is the one that I've already tested on access, and it's going to return us all these field names in the result set. And what I will do then is I loop through the result set, get each of those column headings, put it in variables. I use those variables to then create a student, and using that student, then obviously I go through the result set object again to get the registration details and append the student's toString and the register toString into it. There are obviously many ways of doing it. So if you want, you can get one student at a time, and for that student, you can run a SQL query into the registration database. Registration table to say, okay, get me the registration details of this particular student using the student ID. There are many ways of doing it. It obviously depends on the logic, the format, etc., that you would want. I'm just showing two ways. The one way was because we already have the data from the student table and the registration table loaded into our array, we could just work with that array, those two array of objects, and loop through them. Or you could run a SQL query and then loop through the result set and get the data that you want. Same concept for today's absentee list. So for today's absentee list, in this method, I have used the array of objects to say, okay, I want to see who for today, like today's date, who was absent, get that student ID, and go through the list of students to get the list of students from the array of students. The second option of the other way of doing it is to run the SQL query, which looks like this, which is basically to say, select everything from these two tables, join on the student ID. The date will be obviously today's date, and they should be absent. So copy that query in and run it using the DB connection class object, and the result set that you obtain, you can loop through it and you can build up your resulting string. Because it is for today's date, I don't want to see the registration data because I already know that it is for today and it is the absentees for today. That's how I've constructed my query. So I only want the list of students, so I'm only using the student dot to string to combine into my result string that will be return. Same concept for search by date. So instead of looping through the array of registers or array of students, I will run the query to say, okay, this is the date for which I want the absentee list. So I'll edit the same query we executed previously. Instead of registration date being today's date, I will make it the date that is passed in as a parameter, and the present status is false. We get the list of students and append it to the returning string. Search by surname, again, we are actually looking for the registration status for a particular student with a particular surname. So we append the query to say, okay, this is the surname we are looking for. Remember, surname is string, so we want to enclose it in single quote. So we build in that single quote structure into our SQL string that we will send to the DB connection class. And this is, in this case, I want to see their registration details. So when were they absent? So if you don't want to include this, that's also fine. So we create the objective of a register class, and then we append the toString. So this is just a different way of getting the data from your database to to perform the functions that you have listed. Hope this makes sense. Thank